Hello, everyone. Please take a moment to stretch out. You've been sitting for a long time. Stand up if you need to do this. Okay, we're good. Very good. So, hey, I'm Jordan Walsh. I'm a solution architect. I work for Postman. I'm based in Melbourne, in Victoria. I've flown over for the concert. Been a great conference, sorry. Been a great conference so far. Today, I'm going to be talking about AI-powered API governance. It's going to be far less technical than some of the talks that you've had so far. So if you understood those talks and you're all happy, then this is going to be very, very simple for you. So in my career, I have been a software developer, Java developer, started there, been a business analyst, product manager, solutions architect, solutions engineer, and all that time, across the 20-odd years that I've been working in this field, I've never seen such a massive hype and growth as what we have seen in the last 2 months, 3 months, with the emergence of consumer AI. You take a product like ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT reached 100 million users in its first 60 days of operation. This is 1.7 million new users every day that they were able to onboard to this platform. The next most popular after this, the next fastest to reach 100 million was TikTok. TikTok took 9 months to reach this same goal. The next one after that took years. Somehow, ChatGPT was able to do this within 60 days. And ChatGPT was just the starting point. Very, very quickly after that. I mean, a quick internet search shows you that it doesn't matter what industry you're working in. It doesn't matter what field you're in. There will be an AI product to suit your needs, probably built on top of ChatGPT, by the way. But you take a look at things like Mixo. Mixo is an AI platform that you can generate an entire website, content, imagery, logo, everything with a single textual prompt, and they will host that for you. So you can have a website launched within minutes. Take another product like Merative, which was, I think, born out of IBM Watson, but they will take healthcare data, analytics, patient information, merge it all together, and produce patient and clinical insights for people to have better healthcare. Take a product like Repurposely or Amplify, which will generate social media, short-form, long-form blog content directly from a prompt that you give it and publish that to whatever social media websites you need it to go to. Midjourney, DALL-E 2. Has anyone played with this stuff? Yeah? This is amazing that you can just do text-based prompts and generate brand new Creative Commons licensed images that you can use however you want. Like Midjourney is amazing, mind-boggling. These ones, video generation, this is when it starts to get into like deepfake territory, right? Where you can generate a training video from Barack Obama about your product using these tools here. I was even reading recently about someone had trained an AI platform to write, deploy, debug, service its own code. So it was recursively learning and creating. I mean, this, if we're anywhere near Skynet, this is Skynet territory, right? And this is kind of terrifying, but kind of exciting at the same time. The growth in this space is absolutely staggering. And it's clear that we're just getting started. The projected revenue from AI software in 2025 is 126 billion US dollars. It's massive. The market for AI, consumer AI products is huge. And so the question I'm asking myself, and the question I think you all should be asking yourself, is how can we actively use this in our day-to-day work lives to make our jobs easier, make the work that we do easier, and to produce better quality work that we're performing. The work that I do for Postman, and the work that I've been doing for a long time in the API space is in particular around the API lifecycle. So this is Postman's view of the API lifecycle, which is a dual lifecycle around producer and consumer. APIs are, much like most software, there's users of software and producers of it, but with APIs in particular, we talk about the idea of producer-consumer. And so as we're going through this API lifecycle and we're defining, developing, testing, deploying, creating this, making it available for consumers to start to use, almost always there's this concept of API governance that overlays the entire process in some way. At each stage of this, we have to govern the process. We have to govern the way we are performing each of these steps. So this is a lot of the where I spend my time talking to customers, and it's where I was starting to think, well, if I'm spending a lot of time working on API governance, how can AI help me in this world? And this is really what I want to talk to you about today. So to that end, I would ask you to think about what the answer to this question could be. You don't need to raise your hand or anything, but I'd like you to think, what do you believe is the #1 goal for any developer, tester, business analyst, product manager for any software project they're working on? You may think it's to produce great products or to produce value for customers, to produce something that is going to add, make lots of money for your company maybe. In my view, I believe it's to build something that gets used. It's this really base, simple form. We want our products, our services that we create to actually be used. If you've ever worked on a software project for a long period of time and found out at the end that it's not going to be used, it is truly heartbreaking. My biggest time that happened to me was a long time ago when I was working at IBM. I spent about 9 months working on a website for a massive mining company. I was one of a small team that was working on this, but we had members of our team in Melbourne and Houston and various places around the world. We spent 9 months working on this website. And we got to the end of the project, everything was done, beautiful website. We showed it to the executives of this mining company, and they didn't like the design. They thought it, functioned okay, everything was delivered to spec, but didn't like it, so thanks, shake hands, pay the bill, and the project never went live. Dead. A lot of people were able to move past this. I could not. I spent so many sleepless nights working on this thing, and I'd had enough. A month later, I'd resigned from IBM, I'd moved on, right? This was the end for me. So since that lesson, I realized that a lot of important questions that probably should have been asked very early in this project were not asked. Now, as a developer on this project, was it my job to ask these questions? Probably not, but the fact that they weren't asked is a problem. And I think this happens a lot. There are very important questions that need to be asked on the projects that we're working on that maybe are not asked. And now, could this have solved this problem? I'm unsure. Could better governance around this could have prevented this? I don't know. But so let's just take a second to see what I mean when I talk about governance. In my view, when I use the term governance, I'm talking about this. It's building the right services in the right way for the right people. That's really all it is. I think a lot of us are kind of afraid of this term governance. When we hear governance, we think it means slow progress. It means hard work. Someone's gonna, the sheriff's gonna come in and tell me I'm doing everything wrong. If you frame it instead in the positive, the right services in the right way for the right people. And I think we all want to do this. No one gets out of bed in the morning and says, I'm going to build the wrong services terribly for no one that's going to use them, right? We all want to do this. But I do speak to a lot of developers when I talk about governance, and they go, we don't do governance because we want to fail fast, right? Fail fast. I love this term. Everyone likes to talk about failing fast, right? Failing fast is a great concept in principle. It's the idea that I want to learn. I want to learn quickly. Fail fast means do the wrong things here. But the problem is it does come at a cost when we talk about failing fast. You need to think about the cost of the developer resources in your team. I talk to product managers sometimes, and I was a product manager. I ask them the question, how much does a sprint cost you? Yeah, so you've got developers in your team, they're spending time, you're paying these developers to do the work, you're paying the hosting costs, you're paying the testers, you're paying everyone else. How much does a sprint cost? And I bet, anyone who's a product manager in this room, I'd posit you to answer that question. I didn't know the answer, I had to learn myself. I found out that the sprints that I was paying for my teams were between $30,000 and $50,000. So every sprint, I was spending $50,000 of my company's money to produce content that was going to fail. The intent was failing. I wasn't succeeding in this case. I was just failing. That's the outcome here. And it was the cost of this, it was the cost of the time spent of my team working on this, the cost of the customer's time that I was then asking them to implement software or features that were never going to solve the problems. Okay, so in these instances, we are just failing. And the negative impact of this is big. We cause developers to burn out. Developers leave the job because they don't want to do this anymore. We cause customers to churn. They don't want to use our software anymore because we're asking them to work with features that don't work. So in this scenario, we can still put in governance processes when we are intending to fail fast, right? Shall we call it learn quickly? The key thing to do, though, is integrate these governance processes with the day-to-day work that the developers are working on, that the product managers are working on, that the members of your team are working on. It's about trying to make sure that the governance processes are embedded in the day-to-day activities, not a separate kind of team that we put on a pedestal that is going to, come down from high and tell us we're doing everything wrong. We have to integrate it in the day-to-day processes, okay? And so when I think about it, then you go, all right, that's our goal. We want to integrate our governance processes into each stage of our project. So what does governance mean in this instance? Well, governance is a loaded term. It can mean different things to different people depending on where you're at in the project timeline. So if we break it down into these kind of three areas, you've got business-focused governance, architectural governance that comes sort of near the start, and then implementation-focused governance that comes much more towards the end of the projects. So let's go through each one of these in one at a time. So if we talk about business-focused governance, simple questions. I'm not asking for much here. What's the description of the API you're trying to build? Why are we building it? Do we have a service already that meets the need? And I mean, when we're talking like the GovTech examples from before, when you've got thousands of APIs deployed across all sorts of different agencies, how do you even know this, right? So really important questions. Who is the intended audience, and what is the success criteria for this API? Sidebar on success criteria, when I was managing one of my APIs, someone asked me the question, one of my executives said, what are we deeming as success for this project? And I had no idea. I was like, requests, number of requests, let's do that. And it was great. So we started monitoring the number of requests on our particular API, and it was really good as we were getting more consumers, more requests were going up and up and up, and it was a really nice hockey stick kind of growth that we were seeing. And then my consumers complained that one of my APIs was too hard to use. It required 3 API calls to retrieve one piece of information. Could we condense that? And I was like, yeah, sure, no worries. So we created a new API endpoint that required 1 call. And so the hockey stick growth immediately dropped to the floor. And my CEO was saying to me, what is this? I can't put this in my investor reports. Like, this looks terrible. I don't know how you explain a 60% decline in API calls as a positive, but my issue on that story was I didn't understand what the success criteria was. And if we had answered this question very early in the project, we had established those rules, I would have known what metric to gather. I was just guessing at that point in time. So the question here that we have is, can AI help for the business-focused governance? Maybe. Maybe is my true answer. I mean, every single presentation we've got here is we ask ChatGPT, what is a high-level description for this API? I don't know. You tell me what it is, and then now we've got it, right? So we're just literally asking an AI to write this for us. And we get a really nice, description of what that API is. We could paste each one of those questions in there, and it would give us something. The things that really matter, though, are the things that people like me, I don't have an expertise in what a success criteria is. Clearly, I just guessed. This has not necessarily answered the question for me, but you'll notice one of these 3 things is not number of requests. It's giving me much more insightful information into the way that I can manage the success criteria for my particular API. And I think this is ultimately the point for the business-focused governance. This is about idea generation. It's about refinement. It's about summarization. If I've got an idea, I can even paste it in there and it will then refine that idea further for me, make it clearer, make it easier for other people to understand. So this, at the business-focused governance, is the main way that AI can support this. From an architecture perspective, we're now going into, are we building this API in REST or gRPC or GraphQL? What performance benchmarks are we looking to achieve? Where are we going to operate it? Is it AWS or Azure? What threats are we looking for in this particular thing? Similar issues. Can AI help in this world? Again, this is a solid maybe. I don't know at this point. But you can use some of the tooling, the AI tooling, to help you out. So one of the things we have to do in architecture-focused governance stage is to use tools. Something like Microsoft's Copilot. Right? Microsoft Copilot, this is an amazing tool that's launched that you can essentially say, hey, Microsoft, go and generate me a document. Make it look like this document that I had last time, but make the content like this and add some images from over here. Run that run that prompt, and straight away you've now got a document that is going to meet the needs for what you're after. I mean, it's very, very early stages, but this is an entirely new way of bringing a range of different content into the world that you can start to share with some of your consumers, with your peers. The other one, similar to the success criteria, the threat model. I, as a product manager, have no idea how to write a threat model. I don't know, raise your hand if you know how to write a threat model. It's just something that we don't know how to do, right? I can say generate a threat model for a payment API, and immediately it gives me a bunch of reasons why I should be, concerned about launching this particular API and the things I need to protect against. And I can build from this. I can take this as a starting point and start to build on top of that, right? So again, same issue, and I'm reiterating the point. It's about idea generation, refinement, and summarization. This is where we get the key value from AI today. It's not about AI doing all of the work for us. It's about refining and summarizing the ideas that we already have. From the third stage, the implementation-focused governance, think about this at the end. You've already built the API now, right? So something is running. We now need to determine, have we documented and tested this API? Have we got standards that, does it conform to our API style guide, our best practices? Has it been through a code review? All of this kind of information. This aspect of AI is extremely, API governance is extremely where AI can help, okay? So whilst it can participate in the business and architectural governance steps, in the implementation steps, it can help a lot. And we'll start with API documentation and testing. So, as we know, probably most people in this room would know the two most common ways that you would document an API right now would be through an open API spec or a Postman collection. This is for RESTful APIs. If you're doing gRPC or GraphQL, there's going to be other ways, but most APIs will have one of these things. I mean, sure, you'll probably have a Confluence page somewhere, or a Word document, or a PDF, or whatever, but if you're doing it, right, I would say, you would have one of these two things. There is a debate amongst the API community, and probably a debate with the people in this room about an open API and how that should be created, whether you create that first and then generate the assets off that, or whether you write some code and generate the open API spec off the code. I'm not here to kind of pick one side or the other, but I will say if you're working in a code-first world, you would typically use annotations within your code, and that will generate you an open API spec, and you're happy. If you're not doing that and you're wanting to start with an open API spec, then AI can help. This is from a contract-first part of the world. You can go again into ChatGPT, and you can say, generate me an open API 3 spec for a payments API, include all the CRUD operations, and include offset and limit for pagination. And it will generate you a very, very nice open API 3 spec with CRUD operations and offset and limit parameters straight away for you to use. You can then take the output of that and import it into Postman directly, click import, and you've immediately got an open API spec in Postman, collections generated, ready for you to use. Okay, within, I don't know, less than a minute, that's available for you, which is pretty easy, right, when you're starting to talk about this starting point of generating this documentation. But then not each of those, you'll notice that the original API spec that we had didn't really have much description about what the API endpoints were actually doing. So a colleague of mine at Postman created this, which plugs into ChatGPT again. You give it a Postman collection, it will analyze each of the requests within that Postman collection and populate descriptions on the collection itself and on each of the endpoints in there to tell developers what each endpoint actually does, all using collections and all using ChatGPT. So now you've got a really nice open API, a really nice Postman collection with well-populated descriptions, but you don't have any tests yet, so nothing's tested in there. So again, this one here, hopefully this will just start playing. This is another example of a colleague of mine who created a plugin to ChatGPT that this generates its own Postman collection with a whole bunch of information, and it will analyze the requests and automatically add tests into each of the requests inside Postman based on the information that is in the open API spec. So automated generation, automated testing, all driven directly off ChatGPT, which is quite nice. So Hopefully that, it's loading, which isn't great, but we'll just give it a second. You might be able to see this. So he's going to go into there, access the request, and access the test tab. And you can see, so they're pretty basic tests, but generated nonetheless. And ChatGPT has driven all of that. How do we continue? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so now we have implemented governance processes across the documentation and the testing sides of the API. But now we've still got to do the API style guide and best practices. Okay, so this is a big topic, probably big enough for a talk on its own, the whole idea of API style guides. I know this, having written most of the content for the National API Design Guidelines for the Australian government. I was in a project from 2018 to 2021, working with the Australian government on implementing something very similar to what Singapore is doing at the moment around national technology standards around APIs. We ended up creating this document. I wrote a large chunk of this, which is the Australian National API Design Standards, which basically tells any government department in Australia how they should build RESTful APIs. All sorts of, endpoints, pagination, the way, the structure, JSON, everything that you want comes into this document here. It was endorsed ministerially, signed off, everyone was happy, pat on the back, all good. Question is, are developers actually using it? No. Do you know why? Because it's not an integrated governance process. It's a document on a website. And developers, as we know, hate reading documents, right? They do. That you can present them with all of this great content, but no one's going to read it. So instead of doing something like this, what we need to do is codify the rules that exist within this document in a way that developers can apply to the work that they're doing here. The way that we codify the rules in a design standard like this is using a tool called Spectral. Spectral is a way that you can target elements in an open API spec and determine whether they meet a certain criteria. Spectral is great, except it's really hard for humans to write. So, ta-da! Generate a spectral rule to validate that all the paths in an open API document have populated the description field. The description field is an important field. We want to make sure that that's populated. This spectral rule here, sorry about the dark mode, but that there, if you when applied using Spectral upon an open API doc, will check whether every path has a description, and if it doesn't have a description, a violation will occur. You imagine applying a codified rule like this to every element of your design standard and giving that to a developer that they can then run across their open API specs. What you get at the end of it is a world like this. This is with a rule library put into Postman, run on an open API spec, and straight away the developer at design time can see all of the different violations, whether they're warnings, whether they're errors, and none of these rules have been written by a human. The AI has driven all of this and made it available directly within Postman. Now, I'm not saying go ahead and use Postman for all of this. There are a bunch of tools that can run spectral rules. Postman's there to be able to do it, sure, but the idea and principle is that you can codify your rule library and allow your developers to integrate that into the governance processes. And this is where you're really going to see some value out of this. Okay, so look, where to next from here? We can see that AI will support governance processes for business and for architectural steps of the governance approach. But it's more about building on top of the ideas that you have. From a technical perspective, there are some tangible tools that you can use today to improve the governance processes on your projects. They're there, start using them. Where to tomorrow? It's as fast as the AI world is developing, I have absolutely no idea where we'll be in 12 months from now. I expect most of this will be completely automated and we'll all be having coffees on the beach, but this is such an exciting time, and I hope that you've taken something from this talk today to apply on your projects. Thank you very much. I will, if there's any questions, I have no idea if I'll be able to answer them. Yeah. Yeah, so, what most organizations do is they will have their rule library as a YAML file sitting in their code base somewhere, right? And they will version that as they would any other code, file. In Postman, we have a governance rules library, with a whole bunch of out-of-the-box rules that Postman supplies, and you can enable or disable those rules, and you can create custom rules in Spectral, and you put them in there, and you can apply them to different areas. So different workspaces or areas can apply different rules as they see fit. Yes, you're right. If an admin decides to go in and hack one of the rules and it breaks, it's a problem at the moment. So yeah, there does need to be some kind of versioning approach. But Postman does have an API for adding and removing governance rules, so you could potentially use something like that. Any other questions? Thank you very much.